So, greetings all. I welcome you on behalf of International Younger Chemists Network and uh, its committee on Science for Policy. I'm Lavish, lead of IYCN committee at the Science for Policy, and your host for the day. Today's discussion is basically on the matter of science for policy, as we have been seeing that science has been a constant force to the policy and decision making in a long run. However, this linkage establishment has been very slow in the past. Given the current environmental crisis and emerging issues, it is important to note that this linkage needs to be ratified, and that is what brings us to today's talk on uh, on the matter of role of early career scientists in shaping global policies. So I welcome you again, and we shall now start our discussion on uh, you know uh, this is our agenda of the day. So will have welcome address and then introduction to IYCN, International Younger Chemists Network. What do we do? Then talks on science policy by Dr. Alma, Dr. Christopher, and Dr. Torsten. And then we shall have panel discussions and question answers, for which we have kept a longer period of time so that we can involve your perspectives as well. And then the closing. So I would now like to invite Miss Bianca L. Davids, chair of IYCN, to take it over.
Thank you, Lavish. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Lavish, I'll just let you know when to change the slide. So thank you so much again. Lavish, can you just move on to the next slide, please? So just as a brief introduction to the International Younger Chemists Network. So we are a group of young chemists with our vision being to connect and empower young chemists globally, with our mission being to support and advocate for younger sciences worldwide across the chemical sciences. Next slide, please, Lavish. So our members are any chemist who fulfills one of the following criteria, who is less than 35 years old, who is currently pursuing a chemistry-related degree, or who have completed their chemistry-related degree or training within the past 5 years. So as you can see, we have members worldwide. If you can go to the next slide, please, Lavish. Now, IYCN started out as an associated member organization of IUPAC, whereby we had a memorandum of understanding signed in Brazil in 2017. However, of this year, we're recently at the IUPAC conference in The Hague in August. IYCN has now officially been incorporated as an IUPAC committee, where IUPAC provides technical and logistical support to aid our development. Next slide, please, Lavish. So this is just a brief overview of some of our board members for the current year. Please, next slide, please, Lavish. Thank you. So I will just briefly highlight some of the activities that IYCN carries out, with a large focus on various webinars, along with soft skills. So for instance, if you please move to the next slide, Lavish. So some of our soft skills have looked at our virtual workshop series on professional development. And all of these workshops can be found on our YouTube channel. If you please move to the next slide, Lavish. Chem Voices, for instance, has been a extension of such webinars, whereby this was a platform designed to discuss topics that are relevant and of interest to early career chemists. If you please move to the next slide. These various webinars are presented by those who were selected for the periodic table, and this provides a platform for such young chemists to talk about areas of their interest or expertise. Next slide, please. Some other webinars that we currently look at, which is held by our Conference Persons Committee, is the IYCN Science Cafe, which tackles some of the IUPAC top 10 emerging technologies, where we cover one emerging technology per science cafe by inviting an experienced science on such topics. Can you please move to the next slide? Furthermore, some of the outreach that we do involves our experiment outreach competition, which is used as a means to provide public engagement under a specific theme related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Furthermore, please can you move to the next slide? For instance, our most recent outreach competition focused on clean and sustainable energy. Can you please move to the next slide? And with such a focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, IYCN, in collaboration with IUPAC, hosted a global conversation on sustainability, which was held quite recently on the 25th of September. Please can you move to the next slide, Lavish? Furthermore, some other aspects of interest to IYCN is obviously mental health in academia, falling under the banner of equity, diversity, and inclusion. One thing that we've currently recently looked at is the mental health survey amongst chemistry students, researchers, and graduates. So please be on the lookout for a webinar in the near future on some of the results that we found. Please can you move to the next slide, Lavish? These are just some of the journal articles that we recently published. So as you can see, our Engaging Early Career Scientists in Global Policymaking was published recently in Angewandte Theorie, which will be highlighted in this webinar. If you move on to the next slide, please, Lavish. That's just some further journal articles. And next slide, please. And one thing as well, just to empower young chemists, the IYCN has now in its second stage of its mentoring program to support PhD students across the chemical sciences and the career development. And we're very fortunate enough to have mentors from all over the world in both academia and industry. And if I move on to the last slide, please, Lavish. So just as a brief thank you to all of our sponsors for helping us achieve our goals and reach out to younger chemists worldwide. And with that, thank you, Lavish. So moving on then, I now hand over to Dr. Alma Cristal Hernandez Mondragon, who is a visiting researcher from the Center for Research and Advanced Studies in Mexico, who will be focusing on strengthening science policy interface in the academic environment. Over to you, Alma.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? This is the first time that I am using GoToWebinar, so I I don't want to screw up. Yeah.
No, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you first of all for the invitation. Thank you for this opportunity to work together on this issue. Well, maybe you can hear that I am also a chemist. Well, I was a chemist. I am a chemist, but I am not doing nothing very specific in the lab, for example. Last year, my focus has shifted towards trying to making science policy interface a formal discipline of study and practice. And I say training because it's still a work in progress. But I'd like to share some efforts that I have been making with within the academia in Mexico. And to begin, I think that it's important, as Lovish mentioned in the start, that we need to recognize that the relationship between science and policy often seems like a broken bridge, right? And this is not an idea, a main idea, is the United Nations Environment Program has referred to this disconnection for over a decade. So in Mexico and in Latin America in general, if we look at the indicators like research, number of research per inhabitants, or budgets for science, for research and development, um, we can see that it's evident that there is a significant gap between science and policy. However, rather to trying to discuss on this matter, on science policy specifically, which could take hours, I'd like to share that we are doing to contribute to repair this bridge. In 2018, I had the opportunity to conduct an introductory workshop on careers outside academia, which received a positive response by the students. But some of my academic colleagues protested against me, and I couldn't continue to teach these topics. And sometimes you need to change your original idea, right? So I decided to approach to the city government, where I was allowed to design and coordinate the Fair Science Policy Interface training program in Latin America. And 3 participants of the initial workshop joined to this program, were selected to join to this program. Subsequently, and thanks to this experience, I had the chance to collaborate across Latin America in developing similar programs, and we are still doing that. And while the training program yield excellent results, and I am mentioning some challenges that are present, the scientists in charge of the city education and science ministry decide that young scientists were not the best ones advisors, uh, despite the results. So she decided that it will be better if only senior scientists provide advice. Consequently, the program was not renewed, and I returned to academia. And with the support of colleagues from United States and Europe, I designed an elective course on science policy interface and governmental science advice, um, informed by my experience with this program in Mexico City government. And I formally began teaching in 2021, and it has been a challenging but incredible enriching experience. So far, more than 200 doctoral students have gained a general understanding of this science policy interface. Their concepts, definitions, frameworks, models that are used along the world. And they now count with the some tools, primary tools, um, that are used in the science advice. And this may seem modest, but it's a significant step forward compared to what we had before. And well, as I mentioned, this challenge, this cultural barrier of many colleagues in Mexico are a problem. Uh, in fact, well, one of the biggest problems is that in Mexico there is not a single specialized unit on science and policy. Um, this there isn't a single unit dedicated to this formal work between science and policy in any university in Mexico. So uh, once I tried to impulse the creation of one of these, and I experienced mobbing for proposing this. So without these specialized units, building a bridge between science and policy making becomes even more challenging. But we are trying to do other actions, not only in academia, but in order to invite academia to participate. We are well, I have been involved in founding the Mexican Association for the Advancement of Science. Also the chapter, the Mexican chapter of the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World. And through these actions, we are integrating the idea of contributing to and developing the relationship between science and society. And I think that in order to do that, we need to involve society. How exactly? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but we need to try in multiple ways. In our context in Latin America, society has lost faith in policy and policymakers, and there is a skepticism related to science and scientists as well. So repairing this relationship, especially if we exclude society, will be incredibly challenging. And I don't think it can be possible. I firmly believe that only by joining hands and with each other, we can move forward. That's why I work, and thank you. With that's it. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Alma, for your nice talk on how academics and science for policy can come together. Am I clearly audible now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so thank you for the talk. So she has been she keeps her experience with visiting researcher and a constant emerging working constantly on bridging the science for policy gap, and that's why she has been instrumental to our discussions on academics and science for policy. Now next I will invite Christopher, Dr. Christopher, who is a science policy expert and fellow at American Academy for Advancement in Sciences. So let us welcome him, and he will present his thought on science and technology policies for bridging the science policy gap. Dr. Christopher, please take over.
Great, thank you so much. Hopefully folks can hear me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to participate and great to be among such good company. And I'll just briefly give a few remarks kind of based on some of my experiences working in the science and technology policy space, and particularly kind of some of the mechanisms that exist in the United States that specifically work to bring especially early career scientists into the discussions of science policy, both at the local and national level. So I currently, I'll start with, I'd say there's been a growing interest, as Alma just kind of mentioned, there's very much a growing interest in including scientists and engineers in the policymaking kind of sphere and kind of better understanding what ways to do that. I'd say in the United States, especially over the past 5 or 6 years, it has really, a lot of the things that I'll talk about existed before then, but it's really kind of grown exponentially, that interest. And so developing mechanisms, particularly for early career folks to get involved, has been a key area of focus, and one that I've been involved in as well. I'll touch briefly on one of those mechanisms, which is the National Science Policy Network. So here in the United States, the National Science Policy Network, or NSPN, was an organization founded in 2016, specifically to meet that goal and to help recognizing that there was this gap. There was a lot of interest among particularly graduate students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but not a clear mechanism for them to get involved in policymaking process. So the NSPN was founded and still continues to exist and work primarily through chapters at universities across the United States. And that's a kind of network, as well as provides opportunities for early career scientists to really grow and develop and learn more about opportunities to influence the science policy space. I'm happy to chat more about that as well. I'd say kind of in my experience, the network NSPN has been a great way for a lot of early career scientists and engineers who are unsure or still learning about science policy to really get started in a low barrier way. I have also been a part of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. So that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is a 50+ year program now that places PhD level or depending master's level with some level of experience, scientists and engineers, specifically in the federal government. So here in Washington, DC, where we sign those fellows are embedded either in our executive branch and various policy agencies or in our legislative branch in Congress. And so those are typically year-long immersion experiences that really allow scientists and engineers to, one, gain that experience of being part of the policymaking process, but also contribute some of that unique expertise and subject matter knowledge that they bring to kind of emerging topics, ranging from everything from scientific research to artificial intelligence to energy and climate issues, and really be a key part of that. So that's kind of one mechanism that exists in the United States. It supports approximately 250 to 300 fellows each year, and many of those fellows either go on to stay in government or are more broadly involved in policy from wherever they land, whether it's back in academia or private sector and kind of various other policy avenues. So that has really, I think in the United States is a really important and key well-known program for the involvement of early career scientists and engineers. It does target beyond early career as well. And in recent years, there's also been the emergence of similar programs at the state level. So starting in California, but more recently now, I think it's in over a dozen states where different state level governments have their own version of this type of fellowship immersion experience where scientists and engineers can be integrated into government for as short as 3 months to a full year. To really get that experience. So I think broadly, it's very important for both as a development tool for scientists and engineers to kind of gain some of those skills and that direct experience in policymaking, but also be able to contribute some of their knowledge in a very formal and kind of structured capacity. And it really enables, kind of regardless of where folks end up post fellowship, it really does enable kind of that awareness building of the importance of science policy in the scientific process, including in scientific research processes as well. So that's kind of a brief overview, and happy to chat more during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher. This is really great insight that you derived out of your experience and how your engagement in both at AAS and being an intersecting point at science policy. We also have with us Dr. Torsten John, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Max Planck Institute for Polymer Research. He has been engaged in various youth networks, and he was the past chair of International Younger Chemists Network and has also been part of European Younger Chemists Network. In this way, he engages himself with a lot of young chemists, and that's how he'll be guiding us and telling us what is the role of youth networks in such a capacity building of scientists and policy engagement. I would really like to invite Dr. Torsten John to take over.
Thanks a lot, Lovish, and thanks a lot for inviting me and giving me the chance to speak here. I would also have some slides if you can activate this. You did, perfect. That should work now. If not, let me know. So I just want to talk a little bit about the role of the queer scientists networks in policymaking. I think all of us, or I think to us, it's really, really important that we make sure that as scientists, we engage with policymakers, particularly in today's climate of a lot of different crises happening. And we recognize how important it is that scientists in general, but particularly also we as early queer scientists interact with policymakers, and networks such as early queer networks from chemical societies, but also from young academies, play a big role in this because they can provide a lot of structure for us to lower a bit the barrier to get engaged with policymakers. And one such network is IYCN, of course, International Young Chemists Network, the one who hosts today's webinar. And I've been chair of this organization for the past year. But there are others, like, for example, the European Young Chemists Network, which is connected to the European Chemical Society. Then Chris just talked about the National Science Policy Network. And then there's the Global Young Academy, the Young Academy of Europe, or other networks such as the International Network for Intergovernmental Science Advice. These are just some networks. There are more, where I would refer you to the article that we have mentioned already. But all of those networks essentially provide structures where it's easy for you, if you want to get involved into engaging with policymakers, to tap into, and also to build up new further engagement and events. And here are some areas that such early queer networks, but academies on a broader sense can do. And first of all, it's providing funding and scholarships so that people can actually work in the area and have funding to do so. Then networks can provide a community so that you can meet other people that are also interested in doing the same thing. It builds a forum for exchange. You can coordinate feedback on policies. For example, when the European Union wants to make a new policy, you could, as a network, together form feedback on a policy rather than doing it as an individual. First of all, it's easier to have a group of people, and second, it also gives you more larger voice to do that together with a larger body. It helps to establish partnerships, and such networks also and young academies also organize workshops, which first of all could be directed towards early queer scientists, so they learn how to, for example, communicate with policymakers. But they can also be directed towards policymakers to inform them about how we as scientists would recommend policies to look like. Here are some examples. The first one is a workshop that the European Chemical Society organized in 2019, where at that time I was part of the European Young Chemists Network board, and I was there also part of the speakers, where we talked about our view on Horizon Europe and education and employability. Here's another example of the European Young Chemists Network, where you will also see later in this webinar here, Joanna Milic has been participating for the European Young Chemists Network at the European Research and Innovation Days. The IYCN, as an example, has been collaborating with the ISC3, the International Sustainable Collaborative Center, for the past year, and we're also members of IYC and have been attending webinars and interacting with other agencies. And here I'm just showing two programs that the NSPN that Chris just highlighted do. For example, this Science Policy Writing Competition or the Science Diplomacy Fellowship, but they do also a large number of other activities. Now, just some final words. So in this article, we also finished with some general recognition, like the recommendations, which boil down to the areas of recognition, training, and mentorship, as three areas that we find to be important that get strengthened, so that scientists and early queer scientists in particular have more time and are better prepared to invest into engaging with policymakers. And just as an example, it's really important that early queer scientists get trained. Some things that Chris has also highlighted, but that there's also mentorship, and these are things that like this community building, mentorship, and training are things where chemical societies, where young academies can really tap into. When it comes to recognition, it's something where the academic system as a whole also needs to work on. And of course, we will have further discussion now in this webinar, but I just want to make some advertisement again for this article. So this is one where we have a bit more broadly into a bit more context, also highlighted the challenges and barriers and which opportunities exist for political scientists to engage in policymaking. And a few years ago, we also published one on which was more focused on how European policymaking works. Yeah. So thanks for that, and I am then giving back to Lovish.
Thank you, Torsten. So, thank you, Torsten. So it was a great talk regarding how Younger Chemists Network can actually help in bridging that dimension of science and policy. Now we shall move into panel discussion. We have moderator Dr. Giovanna Milik, who is the assistant professor and group leader at Adolf Merkle Institute of University of Freiburg. She'll be moderating the discussion on various issues of science for policy, how basically different aspects of science for policy will be touched, and with taking the expertise of the speakers that we have, the panelists that we have, she'll be enlightening you with a lot of insights. I hand it over to Dr. Giovanna.
Well, thank you very much, Lovish. Thank you, Bianca, and also the IYCN in general for this great initiative to come together and discuss this important topic of the general role of early career scientists in shaping global policies. So to proceed with the discussion, I would actually like to invite all the speakers to join me, turn back their cameras, and start a brief exchange following some of the points that they raised already during their interventions. So from my side as well, I would like to thank you for very brief but dense interventions in terms of the vast and very diverse experiences that you bring to the table, but also inspiring ideas in terms of how to tackle some of these questions of engagement of early career scientists. So from highlighting the importance of addressing this gap, Alma, between science and policy, with, for instance, initiating some of the training, through perhaps highlighting now the increasing importance of this through Chris's intervention, and finally Torsten indicating the possibility of some of these young networks to contribute to engaging more early career scientists. So to start with, there seems to be an overreaching motif that brings together all of these interventions and also stimulates us to come here today and have this discussion, is the question of some of the obstacles for engagement when it comes to young scientists in shaping global policy. So Alma, you have already highlighted that the importance of this that is becoming increasingly apparent. Chris, you have really brought to our attention the fact that especially in the US, this interest overall is becoming more than apparent, but there are even existing programs for a very long time now addressing this. But my question to all of you is, what do you find to be at the moment some of the key obstacles that you would like to highlight to such an engagement of young scientists in policymaking? So to start off, maybe Alma, if you want to elaborate on this point, you already gave us some hints during your intervention, but maybe you want to comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. It's a very interesting question. I believe that one of the most important issues and challenge for attract early career researchers to participate in science and policy. At least I will speak from the Global South point of view. One of the main challenges are the evaluation systems. You know, in our countries, this activity is not recognized. So if you want to take your own time and to waste, as many senior scientists say, you are able to do, but nobody can and will recognize it in your in your assessment. And obviously, these kind of issues are a clear impediment to ascend in your positions. You know, you can be a professor, a full-time professor, if you take your time or in working in the science policy. But you can use your time wisely and write a lot of papers, and it will be recognized, but not if you are working in any area outside academia, traditional academia. I think that this is a real challenge.
Thank you for elaborating on this. Would you like to add something to that, Chris, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd second everything that Alma said. Kind of that time and recognition piece, I think, are key barriers. I'll add one more, especially from an early career perspective, is the resources and financial resources as well. I think, as mentioned, right, a lot of the opportunities at science and policy, whether it's for training and those type or professional development, cost resources, and those are resources that are not typically given to students in PhD or in training programs because they might not directly relate to doctoral work or research specifically. And so finding the funding opportunities for that can be challenging. That's one of the reasons that the National Science Policy Network offers professional development funds to its membership, and that I can apply for, specifically kind of recognizing that gap, and where some programs or some individuals might have more resources or kind of have more supportive environments that are willing to do that. It's not universal, and it's not as straightforward as kind of more traditional research funding and kind of the mechanisms for that. So I'd say kind of developing more opportunities to think about creative ways to fund opportunities for early career scientists to engage with policymakers is another key issue.
Well, thank you for bringing this up. It seems that not only we do not incentivize the work, but we do not have sufficient resources to support those. But it's really great to take inspiration perhaps from the NSPN fellowship programs and perhaps learn more about it in terms of implementing some of these initiatives beyond the US and in some of the other international contexts. Thorsten, perhaps what do you think about this?
Well, I definitely completely agree with Alma and Chris. So that's I think these are two of the major issues. It's time commitment, which is connected to funding and recognition. Another issue maybe, but it's secondary, is also awareness. I think particularly very early career scientists, they're not even aware that they may have a voice and that they can talk to policymakers, or that they should talk to policymakers, or may think that they are not yet experienced enough and that the senior people should do it, like an own feeling of not being yet ready to do that. But I would say particularly PhD students are already actually experts in their field. They may not have the press that one can gather over many, many years and decades of time. But if one waits until one is ready, then one is probably never ready, because it's the world of knowledge and science is so wide that one will never know everything. And I think early career scientists bring some unique perspective, or like a different perspective, and it's good to have different generations present. So it's, I think, raising this awareness is not happening at institutions. Like I would have never heard about policy advice during my studies also. So it's not something people would normally learn. And then like and then of course, if someone gets interested, then we get to these issues of not having the funding and recognition system.
Well, thank you for highlighting this. I guess these are some of the links that are also apparent through your openings. I wonder, what are some of the ways for us to address this? So you mentioned, for example, the lack of awareness is an important part. Do you see the role of the young networks that you highlighted, Torsten, and particularly in this, the value of them in this context? Or can you comment perhaps how can we address some of these obstacles, particularly considering the lack of awareness from your perspective?
Yeah, it's difficult to say who should do it, but it's I think both educators could mention it, or there could. The question is, of course, the curricula are already very full, and there's new knowledge coming up, and so I'm not going to suggest an entire course on science policy, because then we can't throw out organic chemistry also, right? So there's already a lot of things that people have to learn, but I think as a soft skill workshop, it is, for example, something that could be offered, or it could be something that should be definitely part of an PhD curriculum, that one learns, like we learn about good scientific practice, we learn about science communication, how to give a good talk, how to do literature research. I think there could be also one on how to interact with policymakers, or what's our role with policymakers. I think at that stage there's some value in it. Not everyone needs to get super involved with policymaking, but some people may get interested, and therefore I think universities can do that. And of course, if they don't do it yet, then young chemist networks like our webinar today, or young academies can of course provide this, and also do like a week-long training, or like some boot camp, or a summer school, or such formats during semester breaks. Then it's a bit people could also do it next to their studies.
And that's an important point, not just raising awareness about the issues or networks or opportunities, but perhaps offering them within even the existing curricula. I mean, Alma, you mentioned, for instance, highlighted the issue of not having such parts of the or science for policy or science advisory as part of the curricula that stimulated some of your efforts to develop these training programs. It seems to me that this is not only the issue in Mexico, but more internationally. Torsten, you're speaking more maybe from the European perspectives, but I invite you all to maybe comment on some of the opportunities for such training programs, their existence. What are the ways to address this obstacle to building awareness, but also perhaps capacity in that regard?
If I may, I want to share with you two things. One of them is obviously regarding this participation, this curricula in the students. I mentioned before that until now there are maybe 100 students doctoral students who are now with a base on what is science policy interface, some bases, some concepts, models, and so on. And it was very grateful. And I want to say that now the two of the very first students, two of them are now working full-time in the science policy interface in new positions created for them, all exclusively created for them. So even with this can take a long, very many years, it's possible to develop new options. And I think that, in fact, with the help of these persons, we are now, well, I am excited to announce that next week we will officially launch the Young Academy of Mexico. The idea is continue uniting efforts. AMEXAC, the Mexican Association for the Advancement of Science, has served as an incubator for this initiative. And we are very happy that finally we have all the bases in order to start. And we believe that with this network, we can gain a lot of new voices of early career researchers who want to work yeah, in with the science policy, with society, and obviously be excellence in science. But and this is the last point. I think that I really believe that we need to involve society in our efforts, because without society, we are only 3 or 4 persons in working about these topics, you know. So yeah, that's my comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing this inspiring story, and congratulations. It's a lot of perseverance leading to really wonderful steps that can inspire many others to persevere in that regard. So thank you for sharing, Alma. Excited to hear this, and I guess there might be other opportunities emerging now from at least institutionalizing things within the young academy. I guess apart from young networks in general, you have all also to an extent mentioned the role of the potentially or academies in that sense, bringing the awareness, but also the training or building capacity, but perhaps making this link with society, Alma, or more general public, right? When it comes to the not only the importance, but also the possibilities for engagement. And perhaps one of the important questions that you raised, Chris, in terms of the resources, right? I mean, our society and public also need to be convinced about this important role and the capacity to contribute in order to dedicate the resources to be able to realize this. So this seems like an exciting perspective for addressing some of these questions. I wonder, with that in mind, so of course the discussion is open for questions from the audience, so I will bring up anything that comes in the meantime. I'm also being mindful that we have had some technical difficulties and we're a bit late with the start in terms of the time. So hopefully this discussion is not only to specifically address some of the points or highlight, as Thorsten has already brought up, some of the questions already raised through our exchanges within the articles that we have published recently, opening some of these, but also sharing more resources. But I really hope that this serves as a starting point to engage in the discussion, and particularly in this case for the international young chemist community. So I use the chance to maybe emphasize the not only importance of chemistry across a number of science for policy questions that stimulates a lot of chemists to engage in these roles. Alma is a great example of this, as well as a number of our other colleagues. I'm continuously surprised by how many of our colleagues who are chemists take a number of leadership roles when it comes to science for policy internationally. So I think this also speaks for the importance in the field, and I hope this encourages our community to also get more engaged. So I maybe want to mention one more thing in that regard, which is when we think about this awareness, training, resources, sometimes the lack of a concrete link to a specific discipline, domain, might be also a factor that discourages engagement. I know, Alma, you mentioned these general trainings. We see a number of them across Europe or maybe in the US that are very generic. And sometimes the impression is also that people who are interested might not get directly engaged, or they might even further ask themselves questions. Thorsten, you mentioned, am I really ready? Is this for me? Can I really contribute with my expertise by participating in these trainings that seem very remote and far away? So maybe it's a thought to consider in that sense as well. So I see we do not have any specific questions, but I hope this exchange stimulates some more. So perhaps to close the discussion before opening the floor for further comments from the IYCN, I would like to ask you, considering all these factors and points that we have tackled briefly upon, what advice would you actually offer at this particular stage to young scientists, and perhaps even more specifically young chemists who would still like to engage or are interested to engage in science for policy? So Chris, would you like to start maybe?
Sure, thanks. And I'll jump on maybe that last point you mentioned as well, kind of about being where you don't have the right expertise. I think that that's really important, especially for younger chemists, younger scientists and engineers. And I'd say, as someone who works in policy now, I've do not work on issues that are directly related to my doctoral studies, or even chemistry in some ways. So I think don't underestimate kind of the breadth of knowledge and the skills that you've gained kind of through scientific training. I think it translates very well to a wide variety of issues. And I'd say in terms of thinking about opportunities to get engaged, there's absolutely lots of opportunities, not just in kind of federal government, but also in local and state governments in the US and kind of more locally community, where there are issues that might be more tangentially related to particular areas of training, but there's definitely a need for kind of scientific knowledge or for folks who are enthusiastic and willing to jump in. So I'd encourage folks to check out opportunities like that as well.
Thank you. I hope the people are listening carefully, and we might come back to you on this, Chris. Alma?
Yes, I think that one of the Chris recommendations obviously are I agree, and also I want to share that we need to be proactive. You know, you can support or maybe initiate one activity related with the science policy. We have to understand that science is not the only issue, the only thing that will be considered in the table, that you can have a seat, but you don't have the vote, right? And we need to understand our role in the ecosystem. And once you define your role, yeah, you can be advisor, but also you can be advocate, or you can be anything, you know, but you need to be clear with which role are you playing in the game. So and I think that we need to gain experience, and this we need to seek training opportunities, participate in internship, and well, broaden your horizons. There is a lot of things that we can do.
Well, thanks a lot for this inviting and open message, Alma. Thorsten?
Things I like and agree with what Alma and Chris just advised. So it's I think in the article and also today I discussed a lot about what academies and young networks can do, but I also completely agree that it's our proactivity that determines on what we can do. So we should all just be curious about what we can do and also look into the opportunities that, for example, the role of policy advice, maybe just as one element next to our academic or industry career, or whether it's a full-time policy career. I think it's important to be curious, and if you are interested in it, there are definitely a lot of resources online. Not every country and university has a lot of support, but some have, and otherwise there are also online courses and handbooks and such our article, and we also listed there some resources. So it's definitely, if you're interested, there are things to get involved, and then joining a network such as the NSPN or some others is, I think, a great way of getting a network and getting other people who are also interested in it and to do something with them together.
Well, thank you so much. This is leaving us with really important thoughts here. So thank you so much for the discussion. So for all those who are interested, the messages are clear. So do not underestimate your role or expertise. Get involved and be curious. So if you're interested, there is a community out there and a number of opportunities for everyone to explore. So do not hesitate to reach out. And once more, a thank you note from my side as well for the incredible work of the European and international young chemist networks in providing this community a platform and perspectives, as well as sharing, increasing this capacity and awareness for young scientists in science for policymaking. So thank you so much. Back to you, Bianca and Lovish.
Thank you, Joanna. So we have a question from the audience. Do we have the time to? So that is like, how challenging is it for young researchers to be heard on the complex landscape of science policy, and what strategies have worked for you? I think since I think we have already discussed this. I'll briefly ask to touch upon, just summarize it in brief to maybe to Christopher.
Sure, I can briefly touch on this, and I'll say yes, it definitely can be challenging, but I'd say it all comes down to building relationships and to becoming a trusted resource. So it definitely can take time, but by kind of developing a relationship with whatever type of policymaker that is or staff, and kind of really making yourself available and being willing to communicate that clearly, it definitely is possible. I'd say not fast, but it can be something that you can build up over time, even as an early career researcher.
So thank you, Christopher, for the answer. So now we shall end up the webinar. Before ending, we would like to highlight some of the things. So this article, which is at the center of our whole organization of the webinar. Don't forget to check this out. We'll share the link with you once through mail to the registered participants. Also, we are conducting a survey on so young chemist views on science policy. Through this, basically, we can take your views into consideration and how we can further proceed into, addressing this issue in more detail. We would basically like to know how you engage, how you have, as an early career chemist, have an opportunity to engage with some of the policymakers, and if you didn't have, what are the barriers, what are the challenges that you face, how would you like to give your feedbacks, and so on. So this is something related to that, and we'll really like to give you insights, and this form will be circulated to the registered participant later on. And lastly, so we sincerely thank our speakers, the moderator Giovanna, and attendees for participating in the webinar. So we really hope that it serves the purpose of how you can basically bring the science, bridge the science policy gap in real life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for organizing. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.